So, most of you who end up in corporate jobs or who end up in the not-for-profit world, at least from Ashoka, I think the first piece of news is uh, your success at the workplace may have not much to do with your disciplinary knowledge, right? Some of you who've already been working are already aware. And what I'm saying is that whether you've studied history or philosophy or literature or math, some of your disciplinary knowledge uh, will help you. Of course, it's help you become whatever you are. It's help you to develop key skills. But more often than not, disciplinary knowledge does not determine success at the workplace. It counts for a lot. It helps you, but it probably doesn't determine success at the workplace. Professional schools do that. So if you're a doctor, if you've studied medicine, then your medical degree will pretty much define your career. Sometimes if you are an engineer, although engineers transition quite a bit, I am aware that at the Young India Fellowship, almost 50% of our class is engineers who are now probably thinking of moving away from engineering and doing some other things. I was like that, so I totally understand that sentiment. But some jobs could be in coding if you've done computer science. So there your disciplinary knowledge is applying. But for a lot of jobs, your disciplinary knowledge may have very little to do with the sort of jobs you take up, right? So what will determine success at the workplace? What is workplace really looking at? And before I get into that, whatever I speak today is really based on my own experience of working, of building companies. I graduated as an engineer in 1991. I then built a company in packaging. I used to manufacture styrofoam, the white substance that is used to package electronic appliances, etc. It's also called thermocol in common parlance. And at one point, we were the largest producers of styrofoam in the country with 3 plants in north of India. I did that from 1991 to 2006. I then got involved with building Jamboree, which is a test prep company coaching on GMAT, GRE, SAT. The company had been founded by my wife in 1995, and I was somewhat involved with it all through. But I got actively involved only after I sold my packaging business. And at some point, I'll come to that. Why did I do that? And that really took me onto this journey of journey in education, or a career in education, as I may say. Whether with Jamboree, whether with Ashoka, or now with Plaksha, really defining outstanding experiences for students is something that I'm deeply passionate about. I do think the rest of my life is going to be about that. I love doing what I do. And that's why perhaps I also don't feel tired in trying to manage 1, 2, 3 organizations. So in the middle, I also, with my brother, was involved in building a pharmaceutical business. From 1998, we sold that business 2 years ago. I was not that active in that business. It was largely, but I was an equal partner, so fairly involved at the leadership level. So those have been my sort of 3 entrepreneurial experiences. My packaging business, Jamboree, and the pharma business all went to substantial scale. And in the world of education, it's been Jamboree, Ashoka, and now Plaksha. So that's a little bit about me. I didn't practice engineering as a career, right? I've really, while some of the companies I built had deep engineering competencies, but I won't qualify myself as an engineer by heart. It's really, my life has been more about building teams, managing people, building organizations. So I think the first thing I want to start out with is try to find your passion early, right? and really, what are you passionate about at work? And I narrated my own example. While I built a successful packaging company, uh, in 2003-4, I started to think, is this something that I want to do for the rest of my life? I started to feel tired and, burnt out. And whenever I asked this question, is this something I want to do for the next 20, 30 years? The constant answer was no, right? It was a hugely successful business. As I mentioned, we had 3 plants. We were the largest manufacturers of styrofoam. We had built great teams, some great people, but sort of I had no passion for that business, right? It was another commodity we were making. We could equally make something else. But beyond that, it was not calling me or not driving me at all, right? So I decided to sell that, and my dad thought I'd gone crazy. I was 34 or something at that time, maybe, yeah. And hugely successful in the first stint. And my family thought, this guy's gone nuts. Why does somebody sell a successful business? But that's the way it was. And I feel very, very happy about that decision. So how do you know what excites you? Or when will you know that something excites you? And often, at least what I feel, none of this is a theory. This is, as I said, totally based on my own experience. What excites you is often what you are good at, right? And also, talent is most often not inborn, but is nurtured through hard work and a relentless quest for excellence, right? So I think the point I'm trying to make is, you become good at something after you relentlessly spend time on a particular activity, right? I don't know how many of you have read this book called Outliers, and it sort of makes this point that Bill Gates, his special ability at coding was not gifted. It was, he had started coding when he was 9 or 10, and most of his school life, early life, and he used to spend a lot of time coding, and he really became good at it, and then went on to build Microsoft, of course. But often, something that you put your heart and soul to, something that you really spend time on, is what you become good at. And then what you become good at starts to excite you, because then you are able to do good things. You're able to get success. You feel you are getting results. You feel you are being effective. And all of these are positive stimuli, right? When you are being effective, when you're being successful, then you start to enjoy, you see positive outcomes. It's sort of a vicious cycle. So, what excites you is something often what you're good at, and what you're good at often comes from really relentless hard work, right? The second point I'll make on passion is that often, if you find a purpose that is bigger than yourself, that will bring out the best in you. And I'm quoting 2 examples because those 2 examples most of you will be familiar with. I don't want to take an example that you may not be familiar with. The first I take is a very common example, which is Mahatma Gandhi. He took on the battle of the freedom of India, right? Much bigger battle, right? Much bigger than perhaps what he himself was. And that the relentless pursuit of that mission gave him the power to enroll people. I don't think it ever made him tired. And it probably brought out the best in him, right? The second example I take is of Ashoka University. If you see Ashoka today, right? In some sense, some of us as founders came together to build this institution. I don't think we could build this individually. But despite the fact that we have day jobs, despite the fact that we have our own businesses to run, all of us, we stretched ourselves to give time. I took out 3 years from my business to play the role of the first Pro Vice Chancellor, pro bono. I was not paid for that. I volunteered when we were trying to find the first Pro VC, and we said, okay, this will take time. I had been involved with Ashoka since 2007, when we started thinking about building the institution. So when 2014 happened and we opened the gates of the institution, we realized that we do have outstanding faculty to teach, but we also need somebody to run the place. And I sort of volunteered, and I was literally spending 12, 14 hours a day on the Ashoka campus. And when I look back, I feel those were some of the most exciting years of my life, right? No profit motive, no compensation, but a mission that was far bigger than myself. And that really, I think, gave me power. It brought out the best in me. And I'm only taking my own example. It's taken all of us founders together to build this place. I don't want to take credit for that, but I'm just sort of making a point that often when you take on missions that are big, it brings out the best in you. So you are all starting in your careers. You are all starting in life. Be on the lookout of what your passion. If you can combine your passion and your work, you will have a fulfilling life, right? So be on the lookout. Often when you try different things, you will discover what you're passionate about. One of my closest friends is, and I sometimes give his example, is Neeraj Agarwal. Neeraj is the BCG Asia chairperson right now. He's an engineer. He was 1 year younger to me at IIT Delhi. And he's an engineer by heart, not like me. And his first job was with Cadence. He went and did his MS abroad, started working in an engineering career, but then he discovered he wanted to join consulting. So he actually quit his engineering job, went and did a degree went and did an MBA at IIM Ahmedabad, and then joined BCG. And that's the only company he's worked for after that. And he quickly rose through the ranks, became India head, became Asia head. And when I look at him, a lot of people talk about, I love consulting. I want to be a consultant. It seems to be a very fancy place to go and work. And names like McKinsey, BCG, Bain, etc. are big draws on campus, right? And a lot of people feel they are drawn to consulting. The truth is 70, 60%, 70% get burnt out in the first 3 years of being in a consulting firm. And why I take Neeraj's example is that I feel he's truly passionate about his work. He truly loves consulting, right? He started as an engineer, took up an engineering job, pivoted. He probably got a consulting assignment at Cadence, realized he loves consulting, pivoted, and then he did extremely well, and he's combined his passion and work. So that's sometimes the second example I give. And I know many other examples. I know some IAS officers who join public service, but I should say half of them are not motivated to do any public service, right? Probably they've joined for the wrong reasons, but equally I come across officers who are truly passionate about public service. And you should see how their careers go. They're enjoying their job, they're making a difference, they're taking on big projects. So again, sort of summarizing, as you keep trying different positions, different roles, different companies, be on the lookout on what your passion is. It's not easy. Sometimes it comes early, sometimes it will come late. But when you feel the calling has come, be bold to make a move. Do pivot at that point. So that's sort of the first point I wanted to make today. The second one, and I started by saying this, that what defines success at the workplace? For most of you, with a broad-based liberal arts education, your disciplinary knowledge, your knowledge of history, unless you go and do a PhD and want to go into the academia, or if you've done computer science, you take up a coding job, more often than not, your disciplinary knowledge is not going to define success at the workplace. Very, very unlikely how much history you know, or how well you know, or how much literature you know will define success. So what will define success for you at the workplace, right? First, simple, all organizations love people who can execute well. Simple, how can you get things done? Are you able to do anything that is given to you? ability to execute, the ability to get things done. Key success parameter at the workplace. Analytical ability, I don't have to talk too much about, sort of self-explanatory. Most jobs today, especially again, if you look at the whole domain of finance, consulting, very, very analytical. You go into data analysis. So if you are analytical, if you can connect the dots quickly, it will help you succeed, right? And this can come through any disciplinary knowledge, communication, both writing and oral. And I have to tell you how much of a dearth there is of people who can write well today. And even from institutions like Ashoka, right? Just the ability to write well. It is scarce. And some of you who are able to do that, you should really capitalize on that skill, right? Your oral ability to communicate orally and the ability to write and the ability to listen. Communication is just not about reading, writing. How well can you listen to her? How well do you empathize? Your ability to listen is often a determinant of your empathy. The ability to deal with ambiguity. You have like a general open statement. How can you deal with ambiguity? For those of you looking at careers in consulting, this is the biggest skill that consulting companies are testing you for, right? Because they get open-ended problems. They get open problems, which consultants need to put their mind to. So your ability to deal with ambiguity, take data from multiple sources, that really will help define success. Ability to connect the dots and crystallize them, critical thinking, right? We talk about that. And that's where your broad-based liberal arts education counts, right? How do you connect the dots? And a lot of the project-based learning, a lot of the assignments you undertake at Ashoka really prepares you in that direction, right? I think a key skill at the workplace, creativity. Again, I don't need to talk more about it. Your ability to motivate and align people, I think a key leadership trait, right? This will define leadership at the workplace. Now, the challenge is that all academic institutions and all of our education, it indirectly works on developing these skills, right? Critical thinking, analytical. If you're good at math, very likely you may be very analytical. If you're good at literature, good likelihood you write well. So your education in some sense has helped you develop these skills directly or indirectly, but henceforth, and especially after you start working, you will have to continuously work to develop these further, right? So look at opportunities on how you can develop. Sometimes your organizations will help you develop these, right? And when you are picking up jobs or when you are applying, it's very important to understand what are some of the skills. And again, I'm taking the consulting example. If you have an ability to deal with ambiguity, if you do not have the analytical ability, it's best that you look at some other job, right? So look at jobs. When job roles come, try to picture in your mind that what are the key skills that this job demands. Is it more creativity? Is it more analytical ability? Is it more writing ability? And then sort of look at your own self and assess your own self and understand what are you good at, right? And if your skill set matches with what the job has to offer, it's likely you will have a fit. And it's also likely you will get the job. When people are interviewing you, they will try to assess this, right? If I am interviewing people where I am looking at analytical ability, then my questions are going to be in that direction. If I'm looking at people who need to have good writing ability, then I'm going to try to assess on that, right? So try to make that match before you apply for jobs. Try to assess for yourself whether these are the jobs that you want to apply to, right? And often your success at the workplace is going to be determined by the sort of skills you have. And there are many more. I've just put some down. A key skill in today's day and age, data and digital, I don't need to talk about it. So while you don't need to be a coder, but you need to be able to, your ability to be able to play with data, understand data well, will help you immensely in any job. Your familiarity with the digital world, and I'm assuming most of you are familiar, right? Lots of jobs in the domain of internet marketing, right? These are not really understanding technology, but they are more about communication. But what sort of messages do you put? How do you understand different mediums? How do you understand the various audience who are reacting to those mediums? So understanding the digital world in that context can help you immensely. And let me come to the sort of the last part of my presentation, which is the importance of attitude and mindset, right? So while different jobs will demand different skills, all jobs will demand the right mindset, right? And I spoke of this, most of our school education, college education, we spend in really, the education is all about imparting knowledge, right? End of 20th century, beginning 21st century, the focus moved to skills. So a lot of the college education, right? We are intentional about the sort of assignments we give. There are courses around leadership that have come into the curriculum. There are problem solving assignments that have come into the curriculum. So some part of skill development has come into college education. But the third part, which is attitude, how do you develop attitude, right? College education does not deal with that. Your extracurricular activities in some sense may develop attitude. The fact that you live in a community of people develops your attitude. Your upbringing, your family life, how you have been in school develops your attitude. But schools and colleges are not consciously focusing on developing attitude. Somewhere we are assuming that students will take care of themselves, right? Students will develop the right attitude themselves. And I think that's where the gap between academia and students exist. And I can tell you that if there is one key determinant to success, and not just success at the workplace, but really if you want to go down the leadership journey, your attitude more often than not will determine your altitude in life, right? A good skill will give you a good job, you'll be able to make a living, but the right attitude will determine your altitude, right? Standing, being open, being humble. You know, in our own lives, we don't like arrogant people around us, right? Why should people like arrogant bosses? They may have to follow their instructions, but they are not going to like arrogant bosses. So being humble, having an open attitude, understanding that you still have miles to go, understanding that you still have lots to learn, is a key attitude trait, right? Now, how do you develop that? I did mention that some part of curriculum should be focused on that. Unfortunately, not so. All of you are left on your own, right? But your interactions, I do believe that sports, people who are very active in sports, sports is a great way to develop attitude. Extracurricular activities, whether you're part of any music societies, sports, any groups, group work develops attitude, right? So those are some ways of developing the right attitude, but focus on these, and some of these will take you on to make you high performers and take you on the leadership journey. Taking responsibility, right? Nobody is perfect. You're all going to goof up. Is there somebody that we can rely on? Does she honor her word, right? Absolutely important. Commitment. Again, it's like a switch. I sometimes tell people commitment is like a switch. You can put it on or put it off, right? Are you playing the game 100% or 80%? And I sometimes give this example. I was once, my younger brother lives in the US and his son is a soccer player. So I once took him to his soccer coaching and their coach was training. He says, once you are on the court, you are either 100% or not there, right? So either you put in your 100% or you're not playing. And your attitude at your workplace, I believe not only at workplace, but everything else you do in life is like that switch, right? If you have chosen to play a game, play it full on, 100%. The growth mindset, to make yourself grow, to make people around you grow, the organizations that you work for, to make them grow, right? You will have various opportunities to develop mindsets. Grab those. You will have great bosses who will teach you. I said the group work, sport, extracurricular sometimes helps develop that. Grab those opportunities. I do believe there are some tremendous leadership courses which help you develop this. Entrepreneurship, some of you looking at careers in entrepreneurship, is going to be largely about mindset, right? It's really going to be about your grit, determination, perseverance, ability to connect with people. So all skills and attitude coming in there. What can you do now? Be serious and committed to finding a job. Avoid some easy goof ups. Be punctual. Dress up properly. I mean, these are like easy giveaways. Self-reflect, right? Put the mirror to yourself. If you can't do it, do some mock interviews with somebody else and tell them, what are you doing well? What are you not doing well, right? Research about jobs. Find out what skills they want. Find out, self-analyze what are you good at and really make that match. And interviewing is a skill, I can tell you. If you put an effort into preparing yourself for an interview, after the right amount of training, you can crack interviews. Trust me on that, right? I've worked with people who start like a 2 or 3 on the interview and progress to a 7, 8. How do you know you interview well? Do a mock interview with somebody you trust, right? The person will be able to tell you clearly where you were messing up, right? Some of you may need little help. Some of you are outstanding in your first interviews. Some of you may need a lot of help, right? Reach out to Priyanka, reach out to the career team and really work there. Mentor, find good mentors, find good coaches, people who you can trust, people who you can work. Don't be afraid of asking for help, right? I ask for help all the time. I have a coach, even today, whom I meet once a month. We have dedicated time and I'm able to share where I'm struggling and get insights on what I can do better. Lastly, Priyanka did want me to talk a little bit about what sort of jobs are available. While I can't really speak about the entire universe, I do have exposure in education. I do believe some new exciting universities are great places to work, whether it's Ashoka, whether it's Plaksha. There are some others coming up now. There are some exciting places if you want a career if you want to work in the education sector. Some of you may be keen to work in schools. Lot of excitement around EdTech, right? In the last 6 months, all of you are learning online. I run a test prep company. I'm part of building 2 universities. I know all of our education has been online. Lot of action happening in the EdTech space. Lot of funding available. Lot of these companies are scaling up. Great opportunity, great sector to work in. And they are recruiting big time. Counseling, career counseling, test prep. That's another area to work at, right? Organizations like Jamboree or some other career counseling company, test prep companies, they are expanding. I know Akash Tutorial, for example, is expanding big time, and some other companies. And then again, not-for-profit organizations working on learning outcomes, curriculum design, some impact work. So broadly, tremendous opportunity in the education sector. We do have lots of organizations who come and recruit from Ashoka. I'm sure the career development cell is keeping you abreast. I'm happy if any of you want to reach out. My email is vineet@ashoka.edu.in, VINEET. I'll put it on the chat too. And you are free to write to me for any advice, any help. I think I will end here. Priyanka did suggest that we should leave some time for Q&A. So I'm happy to take questions. Talk about any other opportunities that may exist. Thank you for listening very patiently. And over to you, Priyanka.
Thanks, Vineet. For many of us, you are an inspiration, not only in the kind of career you've had, but also the person that you are. Certain very, very important points that you brought up. Do what excites you, do what you're good at. In fact, that's only when one will be happy to strive hard, in fact. Find a passion, combine your passion with work, something that we've seen as a sure ingredient for success, and also immense job satisfaction. And you have stressed the importance of education, execution ability, analytical thinking, communication, and ability to listen, specially dealing with ambiguity, etc. Connecting the dots, creativity, leadership ability, collaboration, etc. I think very, very pertinent points brought up by you. Vineet, our students are very keen to get that presentation that you have shared with us. So I'll be grateful if you can share it with us. I think it will be an opportunity for them to sort of delve deeper and think these very, very pertinent points through. So thank you so much. I'm going to just pick up a few questions that we had asked students to, in fact, send us in advance, and some, of course, we'll urge them to perhaps type it on the chat box, but I'll start with what I have already. What are your views on starting one's career with a high-risk early stage startup? What should I keep in mind when applying for these roles?
Right. It really depends on the sort of person you are. If you want more freedom, if you are the sort of person who likes more freedom, if you are not so fascinated by a bigger brand, but you want greater responsibility, right? Then these early startups are great places to work because they will give you bigger roles. They will give you more freedom. But you should have, if you are joining an early startup, make sure you have the ability to deal with ambiguity. You have the ability to take charge of yourself. These roles are not going to be often very guided. Structured corporates, you can pretty much go with the flow. The moment you come in, there is an orientation, you would guide it. It'll take you 2 months to settle in. Gradually, you are given a role. So you're almost sort of getting guided in, right? Early startups, job roles may not be very well defined. Great responsibility, great places to learn, by the way. You learn a lot, right? You learn much more in an early startup than you would learn in perhaps an established company. But, really depends on what you want to do later on. I would personally, the sort of person I am, I would love to take those opportunities. But if you are looking for a stable corporate career, if that is what excites you, then maybe not. But if you are looking at some point, you want to build your own startup, then absolutely yes. If you are okay and your desire is really to learn more, take on greater responsibilities, then absolutely yes. So I think really depends on the sort of, they may not pay you as much. That's the other thing to worry about, right? So you have to be prepared with that too. So I think these are choices you have to make. But those are the trade-offs. I mean, I spoke of some trade-offs. Those are some.
Right. In fact, what we're seeing, Vineet, largely, and particularly at a time like this around COVID times and how it's impacted the economy at large, we see a lot of hiring happening with startups. Particularly, I think they have the appetite for risk and are ready to take on more people right now. Of course, as you rightly said, there's immense learning in a startup, from basic jobs to the fancier ones. I think within a startup environment, one can.
And what I may add is that sometimes, rather than taking up a job with a very early startup, perhaps take up a job with a company which has been around for 3 years, 4 years, right? So the startup has taken off. So it no longer has the risk of really failing, right? But it's still small enough, 50 people, 100 people, it's still small enough to give you meaningful roles, right? Those jobs can often combine both worlds. They can combine the world of stability, a little bit more structure, but also give you enough room to help you learn more. So, that could be that could be another way to go.
Right, right, and that's where the importance of research comes in to really get into finding out what the opportunity is about. I'll move on to the next question, Vineet. The student wants to know: I want to go for grad school 2 years after working in an enterprise. What approach should I have in choosing the right company for myself?
Right. So I think two answers here. If you are going to grad school to, let us say, do a master's in a particular discipline, let's say a master's in economics or master's in computer science or master's in literature, then your 2 years should be very, very aligned to your discipline, right? Then make sure that your work experience is very aligned to the discipline that you want to go and do your grad school in. However, if you're going for an MBA, or if you're going for a master's in public policy, or if you're going in some, generic professional masters, let me put it like that, then I think 3-4 things. Try to have your work experience which demonstrates impact and demonstrates results, right? So wherever you worked, but if you've created impact, if you've created results, that will help. If you can demonstrate any career progression, that will help. Any work experience which is differentiated will help. If you are applying to top MBA programs like a Harvard, Wharton, etc., what will help is how differentiated is your work experience from the other thousands of applications that they are getting, right? Making it more differentiated. International WorkX always helps if you do get an opportunity to be able to do that. WorkX which demonstrates responsibility helps, especially if you're applying for MBA. So I think very, very tied into, if you're looking for the sort of Fulbright scholarships, if you work for 3 years and you're applying for a Fulbright and then you want to go and work, look at opportunities which demonstrate tremendous impact, right? What is the difference you are making to society, to people, to things around you? I think that sort of work experience will be deeply impactful. I hope that answers the question.
Right. Thank you, Vineet. Moving on, this is an interesting question. When one is transitioning from student life to professional life, should one be very rigid about the organization or role that one wants to work at, or initially one should be willing to accept opportunities as and when they come? Essentially, how important is the first job in the context of your overall career?
Right. No, I think it's a great question, and it's a tough question, I should say. And there are two sides to it. In some sense, your first job puts you on a career track, right? Your first job is very important in that sense, because it really sort of, your subsequent jobs, people are going to ask you, where did you work? What did you do, right? So the first job really helps you, on your career ladder in some sense. I would say, my second answer to the question is, don't be too rigid, right? I would say that more than the company, check on the culture and the people you are going to be working for. People often work for people. People don't work for organizations, right? You end up working for your bosses. You end up working for the people you report to. You could be working for the best company in the world, but if you don't get along with your boss, you're likely to quit very quickly, right? So find out about the teams you are going to be joining. Find out about the culture of the company. Find out if you, I really think, that's why I said research. Find out, whether you will get an opportunity to learn, to grow. The first jobs, you get a decent brand, you're getting a decent compensation, you get good people to work with, you have tremendous opportunity to learn. I think those are some of the things I would be focused on. If there's a trade-off between a higher comp versus a lower comp, but a better work culture, I would go to the company which has a better work environment, right? If you work well and if you perform well, compensation will come. Maybe it will come in 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, but it will come. So the first job is really important, but I would equally suggest don't be too rigid. Make a list of things that are important to you. Evaluate opportunities through that lens, and through some of those parameters that you've set for yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vineet. This is an interesting question again. If one is planning to return to academics after working for a few years, how do they make sure that they keep their academic inclination alive during the full-time employment phase? Another related question is, I'm making a transition in my career stream. What should be my approach?
So let me take the first one. See, if you are joining work and you want to come back to academia, it's tough. Let me start by saying that, right? And it depends where you want to come in the academia. If you want to come as a professor, you know, you have to keep, and if you especially want to come to a good place, to a good university, there are two routes. I mean, either you can come as an adjunct professor or a professor of practice, in which case, you know, keep publishing, keep writing, keep enhancing your knowledge, and keep your connections with the academia. If you want to come full-time as in the role of a professor, that is going to be far tougher, right? And there I suggest, you know, you make the call early. You know, maybe in 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you should be clear that you want to go back to the world of academia, and then get on to that path. Because over time, as you have to enhance your career and take on leadership positions, starting early will be helpful. Just remind me, what was the second question, Priyanka?
So if I'm making a transition in my career stream, what exactly should be my approach? So there are a lot of the VIFs, as you know.
If you want to transition your career, I think VIF is an opportunity, right? Yeah. VIF is a great opportunity. Some of you have come in having done whatever you did, and when you graduate a year later, you will have opportunities. You will have all sorts of jobs, and we've seen big transitions happen, right? MBA gives you another opportunity to transition, right? If you want to transition, MBA is another opportunity, right? The other thing to remember is that even if you take up a job, skills are transferable, right? A lot of skills that apply to one job will also apply to another job, and you know, you could easily transition. That's why I started by saying that pick up jobs which complement your skill set, right? No point taking up jobs which don't complement your skill set, right? Because you know, you can easily change your job. If you are in a job that complements your skill set, you could tomorrow change your domain, you could change your role, but there's great chance that you will be successful. So I think some master's degrees give you that option, and a lot of jobs give you that option. You know, you take up broad jobs in consulting or analytical ability or program management. You know, these are very transferable. You can equally go and work elsewhere in a different role.
Thank you, Vineet. Some students have questions which they've typed in the chat box. I'm going to request you all to unmute yourselves and please ask the question. It'll be wonderful to have that discussion with Vineet. Naja, would you like to go first? You have a question on culture.
Hello, Vineet. Thank you. So I was just wondering, when you say culture, what do you mean by culture? Like, let's say if you are looking for an idea culture at a think tank or any kind of place where you work, what would you be looking at?
Yeah, Naja, this is a great question, and I'm glad you asked, right? So, you know, some organizations have a beat down culture, right? And what do I mean by a beat down culture? It means like, you know, putting each other down to move ahead in the race, right? So I mean, I almost call those organizations toxic, right? So typically, and I'm giving you examples of bad culture. So these organizations are going to be about putting each other down, about politicking, about complaining about each other, right? So it's like staying in a toxic environment, right? Example of a great culture are where people are collaborative, where people are working to make others successful, right? Where you can communicate and share transparently, right? Where you have fun going to work, right? So that's an example of great culture. And I cannot tell you, there are so many organizations which look good from the outside, but have very toxic culture. by the way, it's not easy to, it's not very difficult to peel the onion and find out about culture. Speak to 3 people in the organization and they will tell you, right? They will tell you, look, our culture is toxic, or this is a good place to work. Come and work here, right? So I hope I've been able to answer your question to some extent. So join organizations which help you flourish, which are collaborative, which will encourage authentic conversations, which will help in your success and where you will feel happy, right? Avoid joining organizations which have what I call this beat each other down culture, right? There you will not flourish. I hope it answers your question.
Thank you, Vineet. Makes sense.
Thanks, Vineet. Deshna Jain, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? It is an interesting one again.
Yeah, hi, sir. I wanted to ask, like, as an engineer who might want to make a career in the development sector, what are your suggestions?
Okay, tough question. There are 2-3 ways to look at this. One is you could make an impact in the development sector either through policy work, great solutions, engineering solutions which impact society deeply, whether it's sustainability or it's water or it's pollution or it's urban mobility, whichever sector interests you. And there are various organizations today who are working in different areas, right? If you are agnostic, if you are okay to move away from engineering and work anywhere, I mean, the world is really open to you, right? You can join a not-for-profit organization. You can join any university. The universities will give you great opportunity to work for the development sector. You can join foundations, whether it's the Gates Foundation, Dell Foundation. There are lots of organizations today which have great opportunities in the impact space. You could join corporates. Corporates today are also working in the development space, right? A lot of the CSR work that corporates do, that's all focused on the development side. And so some of the NGOs are outstanding. NGOs are now being done very professionally. NGOs are recruiting for very good talent. So I do think great opportunities all around in the development sector. Depends on which way you want to approach them, from the engineering side, or are you open to any sort of opportunity?
Right. Thanks, Vineet. Sorry, is there a follow-up to that?
No, ma'am, I was just saying thank you.
Okay. Priyansh Soni, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was wondering that, is it advisable to work on a startup or build something right from scratch post college, or have some work ex and then build it? And also in terms of how much time should one give to understand whether things are working there or not? Because most of the time, as you mentioned, that it's ambiguous. And at the same time, most of the time you're not getting the revenue, but you're making impact, and you are getting other sort of recognition. So how do you really evaluate that things are working and things will work in the future? So how much time should you give?
Yeah, Priyansh, great question. No one answer, but I can give you what I would do. So I became an entrepreneur right after college, right? I didn't work anywhere. I jumped straight in. Would I do that again? I may, right? But equally, what I would advise others is work for 2-3 years, right? And in that 2-3 years, you should start crafting your venture. Whatever time you are getting outside of your work, spend your time on what venture will you do the groundwork, start building a small team. And my ideal thing is that work for maybe 2 to 4 years, not more than that, right? Beyond that, then it becomes very, very difficult to come out and start a venture. At least that's my thought, right? Once you start becoming more senior in your career, not that people haven't done startups later in their career, but earlier the better. Some work experience helps. And while you are working, develop your network and start working on your idea, right? So when you quit your job, you should almost be like in the 1 to 100 journey, you should almost be at step 7, 8. You shouldn't start at 1 or 2 or 0, right? So you've done some groundwork, you've floated, you've got a team together, you're almost like ready to go. I hope that answers the question. Or, I mean, that's my advice. I think there's no one answer, but
It does. It does. Thank you.
Thanks, Vineet. Rohin has a question. I think he's put it on the chat. He says, what do you think will be the major shifts, if any, in both the Indian and global job markets post-COVID? I think a question that you've faced very often.
so I think I think this question can be answered in 3-4 ways. One is from a domain perspective, like which are the domains which will have more exciting jobs. I feel the whole IT industry will be exciting. I feel the whole pharmaceutical, healthcare, biosciences, this whole industry is going to be tremendously exciting. I feel the whole education, higher education, EdTech, this domain is going to be tremendously exciting. I would put these three as the top 3 domains in terms of action, in terms of excitement, in terms of where greatest job opportunities are going to be. And I may be missing some others, but I'm just speaking from my own sort of experience. So that's on the domain side. I think on the skill side, it will test all of you more and more on all the skills that I wrote. Dealing with ambiguity, managing a diverse or working with a diverse workforce, a lot of whom you are meeting far less frequently, right? Many more international opportunities will open up, right? Outsourcing may move to a different level where you actually don't need to cross borders to work for a company in the US. You could equally be working for that. Outsourcing still demanded people taking a flight, going and working, although some people used to work from here too. But increasingly that will become an even bigger opportunity. I feel any role that helps you perform better in the digital world, right? It could be just creating better digital content. It could be data analytics. It could be just helping remote teams work together. It could be building products for telemedicine. All of these domains, anything and everything that helps you deliver services better in the digital world, are again opportunities. Digital services, digital products, both of these are great opportunities, right? And by the way, again, I'm stressing, you don't need digital competency to be able to do some of those jobs, right? In our EdTech team at Jamboree, it's a small team, 20-25 people, but only 7-8 come from pure technical backgrounds. The other 17-18 don't come from technical backgrounds. I mean, they are people who can collaborate, they can work with teams, they can write great content. So there are all sorts of competencies at play here, right? But broadly, I mean, since you asked the question, really your ability to develop products and deliver services better in the digital world is where the opportunity is, whether fintech, whether healthcare, whether telemedicine, you pick up any domain.
I think e-commerce may also be one of them.
E-commerce in some way is already at the peak. So,
okay, there's one person who wants to keep it anonymous, so I'm not going to take the name. But the question is, sir, I have a gap in my resume because of preparation of civil service exam. How would that impact? What impact would that have on placements, and what are your suggestions?
So, it's a great question. I would suggest you be absolutely truthful about it, right? Because there is no other way you can explain a gap. Now, if you start saying, look, I was at home, I was, it is common knowledge in India. It is, if you were to come and tell me, look, I took 2 years off to study for civil services, I will understand, right? People do take time off to study for civil services. So just be absolutely upfront about it. But treat it as 2 years of zero work-ex. You are not going to get any advantage, right? So you may have to start with people who are just starting out, right? So you can't treat yourself as somebody who has 2 years or 3 years or whatever your gap is, right? Be absolutely open that you are entering as the professional world as a fresher, right? but be absolutely open to telling people that, look, this is the gap and this is the reason why this gap is there. And employers are going to be fine with it. But what they will be curious to know is, are you still chasing that dream or are you done with it, right? There you will have to be explicit to say, look, I have now moved on. And this is the way I want to reinvent my career. And this is what I want to do now, right? So very authentic, truthful. By the way, one of the key skills in interviews is to be truthful and authentic, right? I mean, it's simple, right? How simple can it be? Being truthful and authentic, right? But the moment, if somebody is being inauthentic with you, you get a sense that this person is, the others get a sense too, if you are being inauthentic. So being authentic is one of the greatest things you can develop when you interview. It will help you. It will help you crack interviews, right?
You're absolutely right, Vineet. I think the person sitting on the other end of the table can immediately, catch that when one is inauthentic. I'm going to ask this question on behalf of a student whose internet is unstable. So the question is, coming from the performing arts background, someone who has already invested 3 years in it, do you think taking more risks in life would be suggested? And do consulting firms take into consideration such kind of work experience?
Well, I've neither hired for a consulting firm nor, so I'm perhaps not the right person to answer this question. But I would really, before you even decide that you want to apply to a consulting firm, you should actually think what are your key skills at the workplace, right? And then really map out and start looking at jobs from that perspective. I mean, just don't jump into consulting because that looks like the most exciting thing to do. I mean, I can tell you how many people burn out, right? So, but yes, be willing to take risks. Why not, right? Fortune favors the brave. I always believe in that saying. Be willing to take risks. I would suggest by the time you are finished, whether you are in YF or undergrad, when you are finishing and somebody asks you, what are you good at? You should be able to answer that question very well. And this applies to all of you, right? If somebody asks you a simple question, isn't it a simple question? What are you good at? And in terms of skills, professional. If somebody asks you this simple question and you can reply to this question very confidently, knowing what you are good at, you will land those jobs, right? I mean, the interviews sometimes are as simple as that. They are really trying to understand whether your skills match with the job at offer, right? It's as simple. But you have to understand your own skills to be, and these are simple terms I used here: analytical ability, how well do you communicate? All of you would have a sense. Or if you don't, take a mock interview and ask your interviewer, how do you rate me on communication? Ask somebody, how do you rate me on analytical ability? People will give you 2-3 problems and tell you very quickly, right? So do a reality check on your own skill set. And, so whoever asks this question, while you are great at performing arts, and that's outstanding, and it will help you in any job you take. But to the jobs that you are applying, what are your skills? What are your professional skills that you can bring to that job? If you can answer that question clearly, you will do well. So don't worry about your past background.
Right. Thank you. Clinton, would you like to ask your questions? Would you like to unmute yourself? You have a couple of questions.
Yes. So my first question is, like, for example, being an international student, having studied in a pretty new concept, especially in Kenya on, let's say, liberal arts. So how do we leverage this pretty new concept? Because the education here is mostly based on hard skills, like going, for example, to do something like, let's say, I don't know, computer science or something of the sort. And how do we leverage that form of education here in an environment that is already
Okay, did we lose
centered towards like?
I think, Clinton, your voice is breaking, at least to me. Maybe I partly got your question. You're saying, look, in an environment which is focused on hard skills, how do you leverage a broad-based liberal arts education to perhaps land the right opportunity? Is that what the question is?
Yes. Yes.
So, Clinton, I think the world over, and I think Kenya is no different. I've never been to Kenya. I don't know the job market there. But my sense is the world and jobs are similar. I think today only 40% of the jobs are based on core skills. Whether you are a coder or whether you are a dentist or whether you are a civil engineer, I believe those are just 40% of the jobs. I feel 60% of the jobs today are very broad-based and are looking at a broad set of skills, right? And I feel a broad-based liberal arts education opens up all of those 60% jobs. It opens up some different jobs for different people, right? And again, if you are good at writing, it's something else. If you're good at analytical ability, it's something else. So I don't think you should worry about it. But of course, you will have to go back and you will have to, but any broad-based jobs, and there are many, whether it's working as an analyst, a program manager in the domain of internet marketing, there are consulting, there's so many jobs today which are looking at broad-based skills and not specific domain knowledge, right? I hope I've been able to answer your question.
Yes. Just one last one. So, like as a fresh graduate, for example, we've been having lots of jobs saying they need a certain number of years of, let's say, work experience and all that. And right now, after this pandemic, of course, I mean, things like volunteer work, internships and all, of course, going to be a bit more competitive and all. So like, in such a case, if you're just fresh from college, like what is probably the best way to start out so you can maybe build a profile that will land you a good job?
Well, I think the fact that you are fresh from college shouldn't worry you. And Priyanka would have the data, but I'm sure 60-70% of our students, whether from undergrads, of course, have no work ex, but even from the YF, I think half the class has no prior work ex. So I don't think that should worry you at all, Clinton, right? There are many jobs which take people even, I actually don't care too much if people have prior work ex or not, unless we are looking for a people management role or a deep competency in a particular discipline, right? So I would think that continue to develop, along with whatever disciplines you are studying, continue to develop some of the skills that I spoke of, right? And, you will land up a good job, I'm sure, right?
Right. And in fact, there are many companies who do not want work experience. They want to hire fresh graduates also. And there's a large. That's not really an area of concern. We need a couple more questions. I hope you're good to take it on.
Maybe another 5 minutes by 8:15 if we can end. Right?
Yeah. So then I'll keep it. I'll pick the best. Pick a few. So considering most companies have now opted for a work from home scenario, is it possible to ask companies to consider work from home going forward as well? And will these organizations be open to us working from home, provided my role is not product or client facing? Basically, what's going to happen in the future with this work from home?
I think, so again, it's a great question. And we are all speculating about the future with some guidance on what the pandemic has done. My sense is at least 25% jobs will move work from home, right? There will be, we run 40 offices across the country and we are starting to give up some real estate, right? I was surprised, by the way, I saw the interview of the Fab India. You all know Fab India, right? It's a retail. I was watching the interview of the CEO and he said they will give up 40% of their real estate. That really, really surprised me because they are a retail brand, right? So I do feel 25-30% of the jobs will move to work from home. People have discovered the efficiency and power of work from home. Now, whether it becomes 50% or it becomes 10%, we're all speculating. My guess is about 25-30. Now, whether you end up in that 25%, I don't know. It may depend on the sort of company you pick. My advice to you is when you start working, especially in the first few jobs, you should not demand what you should be doing, whether working from home or working from office. Let the company, if the company says come to office, go to office. If the company says work from home, work from home, right? If you think there is room to make a request and they will be open, then make the request. But I mean, if you are taking up your first jobs or getting started in your career, I don't think you should. My advice would not be not to put this as a rigid criteria, right? Unless there is a real compulsion and you just can't go to office, right? That could only be an adverse medical condition, nothing else. So I would think you should be open.
Absolutely, I agree. Vineet, in fact, there's an interesting question around this only, some of it you've answered, but how do I build trust and camaraderie if one is joining a virtual team? Any tips that you'd like to share with students?
This is a brilliant question.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, I was having a half an hour conversation 4 hours ago with somebody on this topic. How do you build trust in a virtual world? It is an absolutely fabulous question. I should tell whoever, I should tell also say I don't have all the answers, right? See, how does trust get built? Trust gets built when in a variety of ways. You can look at people in the eye and you can get a sense. Often you can sit people down, and sometimes the sort of conversations you have, because your whole body language becomes a part of the conversation, right? Now that doesn't happen in a virtual world. So definitely the physical world is much, much better on this side. There's no doubt about that, right? Building trust and camaraderie happens far better in the physical world. It doesn't mean it can't happen in the virtual world, right? Now, if I interact with all of you or a small group of you 5-6 times, I'm sure we'll build greater trust. If I tell you, look, I promise you, I will do X, Y, Z, and I keep doing it day in, day out, it will build trust, right? If we start sharing about our lives with each other, it will build some trust, right? If we are able to share authentically with each other about our concerns about each other, it will build trust. So I think partly one needs to go into the fund. If we acknowledge each other honestly and transparently, it builds trust. Acknowledgement is a great way of building trust, right? So partly one has to go back into what builds trust in teams. And all of the things that I mentioned, sharing yourself authentically, acknowledging people, being candid, delivering on time, this builds trust. And all of this can happen in the virtual world too. Of course, it happens much better in the physical world, but I don't think it cannot happen in the virtual world, right? Of course, it happens much better in the physical world where, your whole presence and body language and, all that becomes a part of your conversation. So I hope that answers it to some extent again. But
absolutely wonderful response. Also responsibility and timeliness. I think, Vineet, the moment one is able to act with those, it really shows up in the way you sort of are able to work. And that definitely does help build trust. Last question, we're going to wrap this up, but Akshit Sona, wants to ask this question. Akshit, please unmute yourself.
Hi, Vineet. You mentioned that passion can be a driving motivation in the long term. And as much as I agree with that, during the pandemic, a lot of things have changed. Livelihoods have changed. A lot of industries are not hiring. So there might be industries and creative careers which are struggling. So does it make sense to hold on to good jobs if you have and then build capital? Or is it just good to pivot and persevere towards whatever you're passionate about because you're young?
No, I think that's a great question. That's a great question. The pandemic definitely limits your ability to take risk, right? So I would think that tied it out, right? Maybe in the pandemic, it's not going to last forever, right? And, I always say while passion is important, but you first have to take care of your basic needs. You can only do good to the world after you've done good to yourself, right? So if you need 2 lakh rupees a year or 5 lakhs or 10, whatever your needs are, if you need some money to survive and you don't have that money, that is your first responsibility, right? So you have to have a job that pays your bills. If you can't take care of your own self, how will you do good to the world? How will you discover that second order of passion, right? So if you have enough savings, if your family can take care of yourself, take care of you, and you have this ability to take a risk and give up a job, then go ahead. But if you don't, then please don't. I mean, that's at least my advice. Again, it may be wrong and some of you may disagree, but some of you may have very little needs, right? Some of you have greater needs, but you have to be able to take care of yourself before you add more risk to your life. Let me put it like that, right? I hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Vineet. If anybody has any other questions, please write to us. We will get the responses from Vineet. Vineet, thank you so much for this wonderful and very enlightening session. I think you've touched upon some very, very critical points, and the learnings are huge post this session. We will reach out to you because I'm sure students will want to interact going further as well. But thank you so much for sparing time and a very enlightening session.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Bye-bye, take care, and all the best.